I've seen, obviously. He's actually the Greenwald visiting professor, and we're very happy to have him here this week. I'd like to publicly thank Neil for his great generosity during the visit. We put him through all kinds of formats and variations in his few days here, so he's been a great sport. I'd like also to thank the workshop participants. It's a very brave act to only have 4 days of work and make a huge public presentation of it, and he really did a great job, and it shows how much can be done with an intensive dedication. So we all thank you for that work. For the facts, Neil's a Texan, but don't hold that against him. Things are going to change soon. He was born in Fort Worth, received his B.Arch from the University of Houston, his M.Arch from Harvard. In 1986, at the young age of 29, he was the youngest ever to receive the named 40 under 40 architects. In 1988, he moved to LA, where he set up his office, and then served a few years after that as the director of the Southern California School of Architecture from 1997 to 2001. Since leaving SciArc, Neil has been a professor in residence at UCLA, which is where I had the great opportunity to teach alongside Neil and really develop a series of interests inspired by his work, and in response to that proximity. And I can say, and you can see the results of it, Neil is, beyond being a great architectural talent, he's also an incredible teacher. In addition to UCLA, Neil has also been teaching this fall both as a visiting professor at Princeton and Berkeley, and his work, of course, has been published everywhere, so I won't recite it all internationally, but collected also in 2 monographs, Gyroscopic Horizons and Interrupted Projections. In 2002, he received both the Richard Ricci Award and the Samuel Morse Medal for Architecture from the National Academy of Design for distinguished work in the field. There's a lot of things you can say about Neil. I think one of them is maybe a real positive compliment when you're inside the field, which is, I don't think there's any architect in the last 20 years, none, that has been knocked off by more famous people more often than Neil. In the 10 years since his installation in the Gallery Ma in Tokyo, up until the more recent work of the Endeavor Talent Agency, it's become clear to everybody that Neil not only invented the single surface problem and its possibilities for architecture, but he's also achieved its highest resolution and elegance. Neil's, I think, able to combine a couple of traits that are quite singular in the field, both a relentless consistency in the work in terms of its focus and its preoccupations, but a singular kind of preoccupation that's also always combined with perpetual surprise in the final effects of the work. So even though it's a singular project, it also seems new and refreshing. I think it's for 2 reasons, again, somewhat shocking, that Neil is really an architect's architect. He is really at the highest levels of knowledge and inventiveness in the field, but he's also an unabashed purveyor of popular culture in all of its genres. So I think he's also got no competitors in the accomplishment really of translating media and graphic space to precise architectural problems and materials, practically inventing a new form of detailing and a new form of tectonics in the process. In the same way that we say that Chicago Circle is both infrastructure and image, that it produces both high performance and a kind of sense of identity at the same time, I think Neil's work is also that. It's what Neil calls cultural ergonomics, which is that somehow it's both highly driven performatively and technically, but also has an incredible image resonance. And I think the work is always delivered with great optimism and freshness without any glimmer of looking backwards or commentary. I think the only criticism of Neil that one can give, if I can, is that despite his origins, he's not really a very good bluffer in Texas Hold'em. But you know, his loss is some of our gain. Please join me in welcoming Neil Denari.
Yes, I've lost a lot of $20 bills to Bob. Also, Bob, you forgot to mention that I beat you at bowling, but I'm a horribly, formally bad bowler, and I'm embarrassed by that. Thanks for the nice turnout, and I think Bob's introduction at some level lays out what I'm going to try and lay out in the lecture, but which is apparent in the work, and that has to do with the sensibility that architecture in its most cherished kind of form could be read as a kind of protector or guardian, regardless of what it does sort of stylistically or how it, let's say, inhabits or embodies innovation. There's a sense that it shouldn't try to be like cinema, or it shouldn't try to be like another medium. It's only the medium of occupation, it's only the medium of weight and gravity and so forth, and all of those things that sort of embody it as a unique world, and all those things that sort of allow us to walk around saying we're the real architects, we're the first architects. I think in some ways I want to try to not offer taboos to that discussion, but to try to break down some of the limits of architecture, let's say, as a medium. And some of it do have to do with incorporating things which are experientially a little bit, let's say, one might say at conflict, because if one is interested in popular culture, one is interested in the ephemeral, how does the medium of sort of, in theory, permanence become a kind of conduit for that? I'm going to try and lay some of that out. I also think that this is really a two-part lecture, or a three-part lecture, the first slide just simply being added as a relevant image to our discussion that we had today. This was an image that I took last May, and I've been up in a helicopter a few times over Los Angeles with a photographer friend of mine, looking at space in between being on the ground and in between Google Earth. And even this sort of 2,000-foot kind of horizon line series of images has been incredibly interesting for me to be able to look at the relationship between deep space, horizontality, and the kind of objectivity of how a kind of graphic project vis-a-vis land use has a lot of influence on the way in which we kind of think about work. So the first part of the lecture is a bit of a straightforward part, wherein we'll talk about this Highline project, which is our currently the biggest project in construction. And to a certain extent, it's a project which probably does summarize, I think, a lot of what the lecture might be about. But I also want to go deeper into it in terms of a kind of a building process. New York, we understand as obviously a kind of city based on the idea that unconsciously Manhattan, among all the boroughs, is essentially the identity device of New York. But identity at one level has shifted over the last 5 or 7 years through Manhattan's sort of growing autonomy as a site for real estate speculation, where architecture and architects have been given opportunities to contribute to that kind of isolated market. And I don't think I have to go into too much explanation other than to say there are 50 or 60 projects by well-known offices who've gotten chances, in fact, to do their first projects in New York and in some cases in North America, beginning with probably Richard Meyer, who practiced in New York for 30-something years and got to do his first building in his own city. So this issue of sort of real estate saves Manhattan, or it challenges the issue of new identities for the city. It's been a bit of an interesting thing to figure out how to speculate on all aspects of architecture where you don't have control over a lot of the issues, in this case, condominium housing and condominium planning and so forth, might not seem to be the most provocative kind of material to work with. So essentially what one is left with, in my estimation, is how to make a private building to convert it into a public project. So the High Line, we know the project pretty well, being developed and constructed now in Chelsea on the west side, and here are your other monuments. 23rd Street is a pretty interesting street, just it's a major thoroughfare east and west, and we're just to the west of 10th Avenue, as the High Line is about 100 yards also to the west. London Terrace is right here. It's one of the biggest sort of mega buildings in Manhattan, big giant brick apartment building. And down here is more of the types of influences that I would like to bring to a project. That's the Chelsea Hotel, where Sid Vicious and Bob Dylan and William Burroughs all hung out and plied their trades. So the site that you see here, it's a block-through site. We're looking south down the High Line. These images are from March 2005 when we began the project. It's now 3 years in the making, more the normal kind of time frame to do architecture, more or less a 4 to 5 year project. London Terrace is here, 10th Avenue is here, and I think construction is coming up to 20th Street on the High Line in the next half year. Looking to the north, it's important to kind of understand this site and this project, and I'll try to kind of fold in the issues in the preamble to the lecture. If, on the one hand, architecture becomes sort of authentic, if it's kind of site connected to a site, in that a building can't sort of be exported to any other site because the site drives it to a form of particularity, to a form of autonomy. My experiences in Japan actually have led me to believe that this is a site which I've seen before, even though it's actually a very singular site along the High Line. Therefore, all projects to me have a threat to move someplace else, and that's maybe the first sort of taboo to kind of offer. Can projects really have so much weight, so much gravity, so much specificity that there would be no possible claiming that they could migrate? And so I want to kind of put that in your ear as you see this project being, let's say, literally kind of excavated out of this site. The project had a precursor. Of course, it was unknown to us at the time that this would be a precursor to the High Line project. This was designed in 2000 and 2001, also for a condominium building on Union Square North. It's a block-through site from 17th to 18th Street, 28 feet wide, 1 unit per floor. The envelope, which was an as-of-right envelope based on 125 feet street wall and a setback vis-a-vis the sky plane. And in this case, it was our first project in sort of the harder core real estate market, where after we essentially know that we have to have a straightforward scissor stair core and we have a plate of space left to make this kind of loft, our project, was pushed to the perimeter, and it becomes an absolutely unabashed sort of envelope project. It was a bit of a shock to sort of A, get the commission, and B, be thrust into the kind of world of experimentation within 50 centimeters, because organizationally the project was determined. Now I'll show you 7 images of 7 drawings which describe the 7 exceptions to the zoning that this building, let's say, demanded or asked for. Because on this site, and I'll put you in the context, there's the High Line. In this case, we're looking to the north. The blue part is the as-of-right volume that could be constructed on the site, a 25-foot wide building. Of course, our client was well aware of that, and he asked us if we could make a building bigger because he thought, for 2 reasons. One, he wanted a more profitable project. Number 2, he had a kind of sense, even though he was a rookie and is a rookie in development, that this particular site would demand a building that didn't conform, because the conforming volume somehow to him wouldn't be interesting enough at this kind of 23rd Street juncture. So that's the main intrusion into the kind of setbacks. 15 feet from the High Line was the conventional easement, leaving 25 feet of a 40-foot wide site. 5 feet into public space. I think it's one of the only, if not the only, places in New York where there's actually inhabitable volume in public space that's something not like a cornice or a piece of decoration. And this profile, which is just a profile to kind of help the floor plates continue to get bigger as they go on the top, and I'll show you why that was needed. It's also the description of where, in terms of the graphic and in terms of the idea of the profile, we were working with the idea that this essentially held the kind of code to whether or not we were going to be able to make this project work for city planning, because in many ways this was our discretion. How wide, how far, how quick can we in fact expand the width of the building and have it still seem as though the project is kind of in a perfect hand-in-glove emergent fit with the site. The issues that also forced the project away from other developers was the fact that the High Line actually entered the buildable volume of the site by 5 feet, in fact. So this kind of Aikido method of simply having the building avoid this intrusion produces this kind of geometry, and it also produces a situation in an instant and plan, which of course had to be worked around as a bit of a problem. But in fact, this is a kind of interesting moment where the zoning forces you to build a complete street wall, but the site condition won't allow you to. So we inherit that as a kind of, let's say, form finder. And in this case, the sky plane, we just simply asked city planning if we could build out along the plane of the envelope rather than in the kind of traditional wedding cake step back. 5 feet was asked for also in the rear because of internal planning. And a 14th floor to make a 2-story penthouse was also asked for. So it's sort of much taller, much wider, much deeper than the building zoning would allow. And with that, the project emerged as a kind of an interesting moment where surely city planning would not want to continue to support projects, let's say, that were that aggressive in the way in which they were tweaking the zoning. But because we have a unique site, we have 3 facades, obviously, the south facade, east and north. We have not only a corner condition in a mid-block, we actually have almost like an end block condition as if the building was stretching between 2 streets, a site which would give you 3 facades. So the uniqueness of it as a found condition for the project pretty much allowed us to be able to insert a building which wouldn't cast shadows or create negative conditions around the site, those kinds of things that would have, let's say, shot the project down. So the front facades, the building is essentially kind of split into two very self-similar kind of profiles. This one on the south facade, you can see the 40-foot wide footprint, 32, and on out to 45. And the modulation between that exterior surface in the front and the back, allowing north-facing slots of glass. But in this kind of sense, the project is both found or excavated on the one hand, partly produced on the demand from the client, and at the same time also quote-unquote invented or propagated from our own interests. And in that sense, this project is probably no different than any other project that we would work on, except I wouldn't go so far as to say this project would never happen again anywhere else. In that sense, I'm claiming that the project is responsive, but the formal language that we work with is a responsive formal language. It's actually a highly economical formal language, and it's a way in which issues of, let's say, opaque versus transparent surfaces, in this case, a transparent surface which is demanded actually by the client for south-facing views, makes a lot of sense. But also for the ways in which the project, in terms of a surface which is relentless on its own kind of ambition to kind of articulate this half of the building, but the profiles are completely based on the demand and the agenda for the idea that the form of the building is sort of sloping back at the top and sloping out at the top. as a way to constantly create the most amount of square footage higher up in the air. Here's a view of the lobby. It's this anodized aluminum. This is the gallery next door. A very small Japanese scale lobby, 2 stories back to a single elevator. And you can see the last sort of integrated glass units coming down. You can see the relationship of the graphic project and the frit on the exterior that essentially mirrors the structure on the interior. And here's where we get into, they're certainly not new methods, but they're particular methods for us that kind of ring true and in this case becomes absolutely kind of symbolic project of that which is the thin, the 2D, literally meet them sort of centimeters away from the robust, modernist, force-taking expression of robust structure. When you read the project here, what we want is that the frit is the first thing that you read in terms of a kind of immediate afterburner. So the first thing that we're interested in actually is to read the 2D proposition of the facade. At one level, despite the fact that the building is a robust, constantly changing piece, and it's never completely flattened in any one plane. Yet I believe in the kind of power of these kinds of devices because in this case they're doing nothing more than reiterating the structure. The question would be, why bother? Why bother spending that much time even kind of talking about something when the tectonics of the project would be completely readable behind the glass in terms of an offset series of diagonals and verticals. Let's just say it comes after a lot of thought and a lot of analysis about contemporary life, contemporary culture, the idea of the resonant nature of the 2D. It's become something that I believe that architecture can readily absorb, become engaged with. And yes, it's a little bit hard to kind of articulate because to a certain extent we're talking about issues of visual perception, for which psychology and history and one's experiences and so forth become a part of it. As we kind of work back into the building, you can just see the machinic nature of one unit per floor. We have a duplex down here, a duplex up here, and step out of the elevator and door into a unit. The profile of the section is completely determined by the setbacks and the challenges to the zoning. The plan is very straightforward. Our client asked us to make actually a rather continuous curtain wall on both the north and the south with an opaque surface on the east. So our client actually zoned the way in which the envelope would work from a visual performance level. And in that sense, we're sort of working with the logic that the views north and south are held in perpetuity, whereas we know buildings could be built to the east, in which case proximity becomes a little bit challenged. The structural framing of the project is it's as light a building as possible because we have the eccentricity of literally sectional geometry. It's pretty clear the building simply wants to fall over from its base. We don't have a very big backspan or footprint to actually connect the building to. And we have a number of convergent moments here in this particular point where there's a lot of eccentric force coming down into the building. The structural frame, the core, we have shear plates going all the way up. And the diagonals, of course, not only do they deal with lateral, but they deal with torsional and twisting. Because if the building wanted to fall over, it wouldn't just simply fall over directly to the east. It would want to rotate as it's moving down. The steel is being fabricated in Montreal, and it's just one link in kind of network of kind of global moments of this project's production. This is a view of the frame. This is the gap between the High Line and our building, a series of skylines down into the gallery, and the kind of back facade of the duplex which we see here in these professional artist renderings, not done by us. So don't get any questions about the renderings. We didn't do that. So you see the proposition of the graphic. You see also that the glazing, and I'll get into it, is very, very large. And the second kind of issue beyond the idea of reading this kind of ceramic frit is the ceramic frit also breaks the building down into 3 big bays, and the glass being floor to floor with no spandrel. The second thing we want is we want the building to look much taller than it really is. The site, as it was about 2 weeks ago, is dramatically kind of showing how the project sort of emerges from this kind of crevice. There's a brand new 25-foot wide building here to essentially weave its way out beyond the High Line. And the image also truly represents the idea of commodity because it's a bit like a kind of crack in the sidewalk. If something can sort of emerge in a world where virtually no piece of ground or stone or site could be left unturned, this is a project that exemplifies that. Here's the spur to the High Line that actually comes into the site, creating this job in the plan. We have a thin wall here before the building. Geometry emerges back up top. The glass is being produced in China. It's coming to the site in these mega panels that you see here, and the north and south facade are broken down into a series of pieces with integrated glass units that are pre-connected, pre-welded to a spreader beam that are put on trucks and, of course, in just-in-time delivery, sort of lifted up onto the project. The team at Front in New York we've been working with, most of you probably know who they are, sort of came up with this concept for the spreader beam, which in an early incarnation you see here, pre-connected to the steel mullions. Does one really beautiful thing is the movement on the facade between the mega panels is only just a number of joints, whereas if you were to sort of put up the glass in a kind of stick-built fashion and the building were to move in inter-story drift and so forth, all the glass would be moving separately, in which case you have to take up that movement by making a bigger joint. So we actually have very small joints here, somewhat larger joints here, 3/4 of an inch down to 1 inch, and I can assure you that's actually pretty thin in the world of a kind of curtain wall design. This is where we don't have a spandrel panel and where you would typically have one to kind of cover up the floor package and the floor thickness, and these are made up of steel plates which are customized to the slopes and the underslung conditions. This is connected back to the structural frame. So in China, this was the first mock-up of the glass where we were exploring 100% opaque frit, 50% dot pattern, and 80% dot pattern. We're looking at clear finish, black anodized mechanical returns on the glass and so forth. And you can see the spreader being behind, so we get as much of an impression of 11 feet 6 by 6 feet wide. To literally sort of shrink the body on the one hand, not only from the exterior, but from the interior, to kind of do a Jack and the Beanstalk project, where if we take out the spandrel joint, we get rid of one less horizontal in this world, despite the fact that, yes, that's very, very readable. But this is the idea of the kind of layering of two-dimensional information, because we know that the grid of the glass represents a pattern. The pattern is two-dimensional. The pattern here works very, very closely with the frit, and we want the frit to be the sort of front surface onto this whole thing. Here's the 13th floor, and you can see the relationship of the structure to this kind of doppelganger, and these very, very large windows. This is 6 feet by 5 feet motorized windows. The main thing about the project is with one unit per floor, you're constantly maneuvering through and around the perimeter of the building. So even in the fancy bathroom, you still have a kind of deep connection, not only to the views outside, which are fantastic, but to the kind of tectonic operations of the building, the robust nature of the structure, and the kind of scale of operability of the curtain wall. It's the view of the 14th floor terrace. The east facade mega panels are similar. They're made up of a kind of different set of components. These stainless steel panels are coming from Buenos Aires, and they're being mounted onto a more or less sort of straightforward stud backup system that will be built on Long Island. That will be trucked from Long Island, lifted up in mega panel onto the east facade with punched windows from Germany installed. The stainless steel panels are dimensioned to do one thing, and that is to be able to have no panel which is curving in section across its broader surface. So this 18-inch dimension allows us to be able to take up all the radii within the east facade. Meanwhile, most of our work and our kind of headaches and nightmares have been about